I said, because if I do die, I'm gonna ask the Lord, let me haunt you.
We so often hear about those that don't make it out of danger alive. But what about those that do?
My body got warm and it just said, get up. You're not done, get up.
I'm Caitlin Van Mall, back with a brand new season of I Survived.
The more I begged him, the happier and the more excited he got.
Join me for new episodes of I Survived every Monday, and subscribe now wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 300 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
I'm good, man. How about yourself?
I'm amazing. I just can't believe that we hit episode 300.
I can't either, man. It's awesome.
It's a huge milestone. I remember when we hit it on True Crime All the Time.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel the same way. You know, I think back to, late 2016 when we started TCAT. What was it? January of 2017, I think, when we started.
I think so.
Unsolved, something like that.
Can't remember.
And I go back to, what did we think was going to happen? Did we think we'd have 600 plus episodes between the two? No.
I was just coming out for the free meal.
Yeah. And you continue to come out for the free meal.
I know. 300 plus down, man.
Hey, let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Nancy Digman.
Hey, Nancy.
Aaron Pesavento.
What's going on, Aaron?
Holly Anderson.
Hey, Holly.
Tess Hurd.
Well, thank you, Tess.
Kirk Lewis.
Hey, there's Kirk.
Just Kathleen.
Well, appreciate that, Just Kathleen.
Amy.
Oh, good old Amy.
Tammy Andrade.
Well, thank you, Tammy.
Amber Grulkowski and Alyssa Freeward.
Well, there's the Grukowski and Freeward.
Jumped out to our highest level. Andy Godwin.
What's up, Andy?
Madison Theroldson.
Hey, Madison.
Sam Gaffey.
Hey, thank you, Sam.
Terry Pringle.
What up, Pringle?
Who you thought was part of the Pringle fortune.
They are.
Okay.
They're just an incognito.
Amand Cusick.
Hey, Amand.
Madison Postma.
Hey, Madison.
Christine Churchill.
Appreciate that, Churchill.
Landito.
Landito.
And Ryan Bessie.
Look at Ryan. Thank you.
So we appreciate all that new support. And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected Megan Vallier.
You're awesome, Megan.
Yeah, we very much appreciate that continued Patreon support. We had one PayPal donation from Deanna Johnson.
Thanks, Deanna.
Yeah, thanks to everyone. All right, Gibbs, right now on True Crime All the Time, we have an episode out on Nathan Gale. An interesting episode about a guy who developed an obsession with the band Pantera.
Yeah.
Heavy metal rock band that led to him murdering a number of people at a concert. So I don't want to give too much away. I want people to check out the episode.
Definitely check it out.
All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this 300th episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I am so ready.
We are talking about Jack the Ripper, the infamous unidentified serial killer who killed women in Whitechapel, East London, in the late 19th century. The Whitechapel murder spree is one of the most famous unsolved cases in the world. So no doubt, a very big case, a case that you and I have had on our list from the very beginning. It's a case we've always known that we were going to do. A lot of times with these really big cases, kind of put them off. They are tough to do.
They are.
From a number of different standpoints. Number one, there's so much out there. You got to make sure you're getting the right facts and you're weaving the story together. But number two, there are a lot of people that probably know this case inside and out.
Oh, absolutely.
Way better than you and I will ever know it.
Ripologist?
Ripperologists.
Yeah.
Or just people that have an intense interest in it. So, they're hard to do from that standpoint. in that there are some people who are going to say, well, why didn't you talk about this? Why didn't you talk about that? It just comes with the territory. In part 1 of the Jack Ripper episodes, we'll discuss why this unknown killer is so infamous, followed by a timeline of the murders, and we'll talk about the infamous Jack the Ripper letters. According to Britannica, for well over a century, it was reported that all of the Jack the Ripper victims were female sex workers, and all but one victim was killed while soliciting customers on the street. However, recent reports show that this is likely not true, and only one victim was actually a full-time sex worker. We'll discuss this more in detail in part 2. The common belief that Jack the Ripper killed sex workers was a consequence of the misogynistic and class-based prejudices characteristic of the Victorian era.
That Victoria era.
Or that. However, according to Britannica, what is true is that all the victims' throats were cut and all but one were mutilated in a manner indicating that the murderer had at least some knowledge of human anatomy. And it's a big part of this case, right? It leads into suspects, this notion that, whoever it was had some sort of medical training or medical knowledge.
Did you take an anatomy course?
I did.
Yeah. Did you like it?
I did.
Yeah. You seem to be pretty good with it.
Okay. Is that the extent of your questioning?
Just for now.
You make a hell of a detective.
I know. That's question number 1.
Okay. Jack the Ripper killed his victims in Whitechapel, an area of East London, in the late 19th century. Whitechapel was a densely populated area with 78,000 people in half a square mile.
That's a lot of people.
It is, if you think about what a half a square mile is. But despite this, Jack the Ripper was never caught. Now you could say, I said despite this, I could also make the argument that wouldn't that make it harder to catch the person?
I think it possibly could make it harder.
If you had 4 people in a half a square mile area, okay, maybe a little easier to identify which one of the 4 is Jack the Ripper.
Especially weeks down the road when there was no longer 4.
When there's only one.
Yeah.
Now, I think you and I have talked about it before, but I really got into this show called Ripper Street.
Yeah, I did too.
It's a really good show.
Yeah.
I think it was on Netflix, and maybe it still is. Obviously, it's a period piece that goes back to this point in time that we're talking about. And initially, they do focus on Jack the Ripper. It kind of expands later on in the show. But it's really good for those of you that haven't checked it out. The identity of Jack the Ripper is still unknown today. According to Britannica, at the time, there was great public uproar because the police failed to catch the killer. Both the Home Secretary and London Police Commissioner were the targets of heavy criticism, and the police commissioner resigned. So, we see that today, right? In high-profile cases, there is often, or almost always, a lot of pressure put on the police to, catch a serial killer, to stop them from claiming their next victim.
Well, and these were very brutal murders.
As we're going to detail.
Yeah. So, the public is hearing about how brutal these are. You're going to want something done.
History.com provides some important context for the time period, saying in the late 1800s, London's East End was a place that was viewed by citizens with either compassion or utter contempt. Despite being an area where skilled immigrants, mainly Jews and Russians, came to begin a new life and start businesses, the district was notorious for squalor, violence, and crime. They wrote that prostitution was only illegal if the practice caused a public disturbance, and thousands of brothels and low-rent lodging houses provided sexual services during the late 19th century.
Public disturbance.
So, to me, that is basically saying that as long as nobody knows about it, it's not out in the open, and nobody complains.
Do what you must or want.
Yeah. and we're not going to do anything about it. At that time, the death or murder of a working girl was rarely reported in the press or discussed within polite society. The reality was that ladies of the night, as they called them, were subject to physical attacks, which sometimes resulted in death. So fast forward to present day.
Okay.
Not much has changed.
Not really.
When it comes to sex work, it's still a very, very dangerous occupation. And we've detailed the reasons for that on numerous occasions. Number one, you're often alone.
You are.
With someone who you really don't know. You don't know their intentions. It can go south very quickly. But the other thing is that you get from this that nobody really cared about the murder of a sex worker in the late 1800s.
And they didn't, because they looked at them as a different social class.
And I would say the same thing. Fast forward to today, go back 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I don't know that it's been that much different here in the United States. How many cases have we done that have involved sex workers where it was so apparent that it just seemed like the police didn't really care? Nobody seemed to really care because they thought it's a sex worker.
Yeah. Too many cases.
Yeah, too many cases. I just thought that was interesting because, we're talking about 100 and some years.
Yeah. Not much has really changed.
No. Jack the Ripper was active from August to November of 1888. So not a long time frame. All the murders occurred within 1 mile of each other in Whitechapel. The murder spree became known as the Autumn of Terror. Now, about a dozen murders from 1888 to 1892 have been attributed to Jack the Ripper, but the police have only linked 5 murders committed in 1888 to one killer. A woman named Martha Tabram was stabbed to death on August 6th, 1888. Some ripperologists, we talked about them, people who study or have investigated Jack the Ripper, consider her to be the first victim. And it is important to note in this episode, we're only going to be discussing what is known as the canonical 5. On August 31st, 1888, 42-year-old Mary Ann Polly Nichols was found dead in Bucks Row, Thomas Street in Whitechapel. She was identified late on August 31st. According to the Morning Post, the newspaper listed her age as 36 at the time. So, again, nothing much has changed there.
Right.
I think journalists are much better at ages today. When we go back 30, 40 years ago and research cases using old newspaper articles, people's ages are all over the place.
They are.
It astounds me.
Not even close. Sometimes.
Not even close sometimes. The Morning Post reported on September 1st that Mary Ann was living apart from her husband and was an inmate of a local workhouse for 7 years. She left the workhouse to work in domestic service, but then left under what they termed suspicious circumstances and spent the last 7 weeks of her life in Whitechapel. Mary Ann was seen in Whitechapel around 2:30 a.m. on the night of her murder and was under the influence of drink.
There's a term you don't hear anymore.
No, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about a lot of terms that, were used back then that wouldn't be used today. Some of them are very derogatory, and we'll try to clean those up.
Sure.
Because when you look through the research, that is something that has changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what they said in the papers back then would never pass muster today.
Not at all.
And, under the influence of drink, everybody can figure out what that means,
Sure, yeah.
but it just seems like a strange way of saying
Right.
it. The paper reported this latest crime was discovered yesterday morning at 4:15 when Police Constable Jay Neal, who was pacing his beat, saw in Bucks Row, Thomas Street, Whitechapel, a woman lying on the pavement close to the door of a stable yard, leading to Essex Wharf. Neil at once perceived that the woman had been the victim of a brutal murder, for her face was stained with blood and her throat was cut from ear to ear.
Brutal.
Yeah, brutal. The other thing that I thought about was that, it seems as though years and years ago, the papers printed a lot more graphic detail. You would think it would be the other way around. It's almost as if it was very graphic, and then we hit a stretch where it got cleaned up.
Right.
And now we've kind of gone back, I think, to being a little more graphic.
I think back then you didn't really have a lot of other media sources, right? You didn't have TV.
No.
So you really had to visualize what you read. And I think the writers, reporters, really did a good job of trying to walk your mind through.
Yeah, I was looking at it more as a societal change. I feel as though like the 50s, maybe even the 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, things got toned down.
Well, absolutely. I agree with that too. Yeah.
As far as the newspaper articles that we read.
More wholesome.
It was thought to have been, or they wanted it to be a more wholesome time. So we're not going to write about somebody's throat being slashed from ear to ear.
Yeah.
No, I don't know if they experienced the same thing in England or not, but I feel as though we did here in the States. It was also said that Mary Ann's extremities were still warm, which indicated that she had been killed very recently. At the morgue, it was discovered that in addition to the gash in her throat, which had nearly severed the head from the body, the lower part of her body had been ripped up, the opening extending nearly to the breast. The instrument with which the wounds were inflicted must have been not only of the sharpness of a razor, but used with considerable force. So, you said something interesting, which is painting a picture in your mind.
Yeah.
Okay. You can do it based off these words. It's a brutal image.
Oh, I'm visualizing it as I sit here on how that must have looked to the person that's seen it.
A woman named Mrs. Colwell reported that she was woken up in the early morning hours by her children who said someone was trying to get into the house. She said she heard a woman screaming, "Murder, police," 5 to 6 times, but the voice faded away.
Maybe that was her trying to get into the house to get away from this individual.
Well, and obviously, if it was, then the voice is going to fade away because at a certain point, you're not going to be able to scream "murder, police" with those type of wounds. On September 1st, 1888, The Guardian published an article about the discovery of Mary Ann Nichols. It read, Mary Ann's hands had bruises that indicated she struggled with her killer. Some of her front teeth were knocked out. She had bruises on both cheeks. Mary Ann's clothes were torn and cut in several places. Okay, so some additional information, not as graphic, still horrible, but not as graphic as what we heard before. On September 8th, 1888, 47-year-old Annie Chapman was found dead in the yard of a house on Hanbury Street. The Observer reported on September 9th, the circumstances of the murder are of such a revolting character as to point to the conclusion that it has been perpetrated by the same hand as committed that in Bucks Row and the 2 previous murders, all of which have occurred within a stone's throw of each other. The murdered woman was known in the neighborhood by women of the unfortunate class as Annie Civey, but her real name was Annie Chapman. So 2 things jump out at me here. Number one, very early on, they're tying the murders together.
Right.
But they also mention 2 other murders. And then the second part is known in the neighborhood by women of the unfortunate class.
And there you have it.
Yes. I think going back to what you were saying earlier, the police determined that the murder was committed shortly before 5:30 a.m. Witness Albert Kadish, who lived next door to the house, needed to go into the yard at 5:25. he heard a conversation on the other side of the palings. He heard someone say no, and then a slight scuffle, and then someone fell against the palings. He thought it was just the neighbors, so he didn't think much of it. Okay, 5:25 in the morning, I'm not thinking much of anything.
Me neither.
Not processing. I haven't had my coffee. Now, I get it. People got up earlier. Back then, they had stuff they had to get done.
Right.
But if I'm outside and I hear what sounds to be an argument or a fight, and what I'm saying is someone falling, I say what? That's just the neighbors. I don't go check it out. I found that odd.
Well, maybe his neighbors got into a lot of fights.
Maybe. And maybe people back then just said, you know what?
Not my business.
Not my business. And sometimes I say that today.
Yeah. I get you in trouble with that Seinfeld law today.
Yeah, I definitely would. Just before 6 a.m., a man passing into the yard saw what was described as a mutilated mass, which caused him to go shrieking, affright, into the street.
You don't hear that much anymore.
Affright.
Right. Think about how bad it had to be, what he saw. He's saying a mutilated mass.
Mass.
Yeah.
That's a very strange term. You're not saying body. You're not saying woman. A mass makes it sound as if this is so bad, I don't even know what I'm looking at.
It's just a pile of something that is disturbing.
And you know it's human, but
right.
You're not sure what it is. I mean, okay. I would probably go shrieking affright as well.
Yeah, as you should.
When the police arrived, they found that the woman had been murdered in a terribly brutal fashion. It was obvious both from the marks upon the body and of the splashes of blood upon the palings, which separate the dwellings one from the other, that the woman, while lying down, had her throat first cut out and then was ripped open and disemboweled.
Right there. Think about that. I mean, we know it's brutal. This is beyond brutal.
It is, but then I go back to the neighbor hearing this and saying, it's just the neighbor. I don't know. That struck me as very odd.
Yeah, I'm also thinking, 70-some thousand people in this very condensed area. But again, it is early morning.
Yeah, 5:25 a.m.
Yeah, you might, you don't have everybody out, obviously, but nobody's really hearing this activity occurring. Or if they are, they're thinking the same thing as the guy next door that said, it must just be the neighbors.
Well, I'm not getting involved.
Right.
True Crime All the Time Unsolved is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare. So it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. It's a new year, and most of you out there have some goals. Well, Factor is here to help you achieve each and every one of them. Fuel up fast with ready-to-eat, nutritious meals delivered straight to your door, leaving you time and energy to tackle everything on your to-do list. Get America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit and start saving time, eating well, and living your best year yet. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just over 2 minutes. So all you have to do is heat and enjoy, and they fit a number of different lifestyles. Calorie Smart, vegan, keto. They're prepared by chefs and approved by dietitians. Every meal has all of the ingredients you need to feel satisfied all day long. It's a great way to cut back on takeout. My wife and I have been eating Factor for over a year now. 2 to 2.5 minutes in the microwave. That is it. And you have a great tasting meal. Also, cleanup is a snap. No prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/TCAT50 and use code TCAT50 to get 50% off your first box. That's code TCAT50 at factormeals.com/TCAT50 to get 50% off your first box. The Observer went on to say the perpetrator of the ghastly deed undoubtedly occupied some considerable time in doing his victim to death. It appears that he not only killed the object of his caprice or passion, but afterwards mutilated her body in a terrible manner, leaving the heart and liver lying by the shoulder. There is on every hand the one opinion prevailing that the Whitechapel murders have been all enacted by the same person.
Well, when you look at how the bodies were ripped apart, I can see that. I can see tying them together.
Yeah, I mean, they're happening very close together. That's one thing. The slashing of the throat is something.
Right.
But the ripping, and I'll use that term because they used it, and obviously that's where the moniker comes from, Jack the Ripper, essentially disemboweling by ripping the body all the way up. It had to have looked so similar that how could you not try to connect it to the other one? And then the two that happened earlier, which we'll talk about later.
Did you realize how strong this individual had to be? And as mentioned before, how sharp that knife had to be. It has to be razor sharp.
Yeah, it's a combination of the two, but it would take some force. According to the Observer, like Marianne Nichols, Annie also had 2 of her front teeth missing. So here again, you have another parallel. 2 women were found dead on the morning of September 30th, 1888, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. The Daily Telegraph reported on October 1st, 2 more murders of the same cold-blooded character as those recently perpetrated in Whitechapel were committed early yesterday morning, one in that district and the other in the eastern part of the city, both the victims being unfortunate women. The former outrage was committed just within the entrance to a badly lighted courtyard opening off a narrow thoroughfare named Burner Street, and the dead body, not yet cold, was discovered shortly before 1 a.m. with the throat cut. In the other case, the scene of the tragedy was Mitre Square, a retired and dark locality near Aldgate. The corpse in this instance also was still warm when it was discovered at 1:45 in the morning, but was much more mutilated, the throat being cut, the abdomen gashed, and the right ear slashed off. The murderer left no trace. Both crimes were perpetrated within the space of 1 hour, early yesterday morning, on spots distant by no greater interval than a walk of 8 or 10 minutes. The sufferers in each case seeming to have been taken from the same unfortunate class to which the women Nichols and Chapman belonged. Okay, so again, I think it's important that, we analyze the writing of the time.
Sure.
And obviously it's where we have to get our information from. This case is from the late 1800s. This unfortunate class keeps coming up time and time again.
Yeah.
Obviously we know that it means sex work.
Right.
But I think the things here to talk about, at least for me, number one, committing 2 murders in the span of, about an hour, but there are differences, right? Different locations. And also one of the murders seems to really follow the pattern of the other murders that we've talked about. And then one had the throat cut, but was not mutilated in the same way, was not ripped, I guess.
Almost like the killer didn't have the time that he normally would need.
And that is very possible. I think, in some scenarios, you could envision someone who wanted to kill someone reading in the paper about, these murders, this series of murders, and basically saying, here's my chance.
Oh, of course, you have that too.
I'm going to kill someone, and I'll try to, copy some of the stuff that I read, and they'll think it's the Ripper.
Yeah, I won't get blamed for it.
Yeah. I'm not saying that happened, but it could be. It could also, and probably more likely, be your theory, because there are 78,000 people in this area. What's the chance that somebody's going to be out, come along, and you got to skedaddle?
But you're right. You could always have copycat killers too.
Oh, there's no doubt. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
So the first victim was found at 1 a.m. in a backyard on Burner Street, Commercial Road. The woman had a deep gash in her throat, but her body was not mutilated. The second victim was found about 45 minutes later. Her throat was also cut, but in addition to the fatal wound, the victim in the second crime had undergone mutilation that was described as similar to that wreaked upon the miserable creature Annie Chapman. The lower portion of the body had been opened by long incisions and the intestines displaced, while the legs and the face were also gashed and the nose completely severed. Okay, we're talking about painting a picture.
Sure.
I mean, I'm painting pictures that I don't want to paint. I mean, I can't help it though, because the words are very descriptive.
They are.
And this is nasty, brutal stuff. But you almost can't help but picture it in your mind.
And I find it somewhat disturbing that they reference her as a creature.
Miserable creature.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was very strange. But like we said before, there are going to be some quotes in here that are going to be less than flattering.
Right.
There's things that nobody would ever say today.
But in the time back then, probably was typical.
Maybe it was. According to jacktheripper.org, Catherine was found lying on her back in a pool of blood, and her clothes were thrown up over her waist. According to Jack the Ripper Tour, Catherine's throat was cut to the spine, and her abdomen had been cut open. Parts of her intestines were found near her body. Her face had also been cut several times, with what was said to have been seemingly deliberate incisions, and Catherine's uterus and left kidney had been removed.
We had the heart and liver being removed to one victim earlier. Now we have kidney and uterus being removed.
Intestines. I mean, it's brutal, but it's also why, we'll get into the talk of, well, this must have been somebody with some kind of medical background.
Right.
Could I slice somebody open and remove their kidney? Maybe. I don't know where it is. The liver, I don't know what it looks like. I really don't. And I'm not even trying to be funny.
I think, like where I think certain parts are.
Sure.
Like if I point to my doctor, I'm like, I think it might be my liver.
He says it's on the other side.
Yeah, or it's way up here, not down there.
That happens to me all the time.
You're pointing at your stomach, man.
Now, could it just have been that this person pulled something out?
Yeah.
Or were they skilled enough to know that this is the liver, this is the kidney, this is the uterus?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I was thinking of, if I was going to take a tour, that's a tour I would take.
A tour?
Yeah.
Okay.
A tour.
A tour.
Yeah.
A Jack the Ripper tour.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I mean, I say tour, but yes, I would take that as well.
Yeah. So
let's go do that. Elizabeth Stride was identified by papers on October 1st. Catherine Eddowes was identified at an inquest on October 3rd, according to the Morning Post. The identity of Elizabeth Stride was also later confirmed at the inquest. British actress and presenter Amelia Fox and criminologist Professor David Wilson discussed the murder in the Jack the Ripper, the Case Reopened documentary. They talked about two eyewitnesses who may have seen the killer, a man named Israel Schwartz, turned into Burner Street from Commercial Road. He was walking behind another man. Schwartz saw this man talking to Elizabeth. As he passed, the man tried to pull Elizabeth into the street and threw her to the ground. Elizabeth screamed. Schwartz thought it was a domestic dispute and didn't want to get involved, but he did provide a description of the man he saw. He said the man was about 30, 5'5", fair complexion, dark hair with a brown mustache, wearing a dark jacket with a black peaked cap. This is the first eyewitness description of the man who is possibly Jack the Ripper. So earlier we had a man hear what sounded like a woman in distress. He did nothing. Now we have a man who saw a woman being manhandled,
right?
Physically assaulted to some degree. He did nothing. Now, I'm not bashing these guys, but it sounds to me as though that was the thing back then.
To look the other way?
No, well, you just didn't get involved in other people's
business.
Yeah. I'm telling you right now, I know if you were or I were on the street, and especially if we were together, and we saw a man hit a woman, I don't care if that's a domestic dispute or not. You cannot hit a woman.
No, we'd stop him.
We'd have to step in.
Yeah.
And I'd much prefer if it was the both of us, but
we would do what we need to do.
But I'm taking from this that this was very common back then.
Sure, yeah.
That people just didn't intervene in other people's affairs.
Mind your business. Keep on going.
Yeah, it definitely seems as though that was the case. Elizabeth was dragged into Dutland's yard. The killer slashed her throat, but he didn't mutilate her because, as you postulated, Gibbs, he was interrupted. David Wilson explained that the yard houses a club where the steward would pull his horse and cart into the yard. This interruption probably led to sexual frustration, and it's thought that the killer most likely went off to find another victim.
Well, that kind of makes sense.
It does make a lot of sense, and we've actually seen this in, much more recent cases where a serial killer targeted someone on a certain night, something happened, and they weren't able to complete what they wanted to do. And so they actually went and found another victim that very same night. And whether that's sexual frustration or frustration from not being able to complete the, ritual of what they are striving to do. I don't know. It could be one or the other or both. Fox and Wilson discussed a second eyewitness, Joseph Lavender. Joseph left a club on Duke Street at 1:30 a.m. At 1:35, he saw a man and woman talking on the corner of Duke Street and Church Passage. They were about 10 yards away from him as he walked past. The woman had her back turned to him, but he saw the man. The man was about 30 years old, 5'7" or 5'8", with a fair complexion, with a small, fair mustache, a salt and pepper jacket, a red neckerchief, and a gray peaked cap. So this somewhat differs from the description given by Schwartz. The age is the same. The height's a little different. Right. Some of the other details are different. On November 9th, 1888, 25-year-old Mary Jane Kelly was found dead in the bedroom she rented on Dorset Street. The Daily Telegraph reported on November 10th. Yesterday, a seventh murder, the most horrible of the series of atrocities attributed to the same hand, was committed in Whitechapel. As in all the previous instances, the victim was a woman of immoral character and humble circumstances, but she was not murdered in the open street, her throat having been cut and the subsequent mutilations having taken place in a room which the deceased rented. She has been identified as Mary Jane Kelly.
So at this point, the media is counting every murder.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that more.
Yeah.
As we talk about the canonical 5 versus the other murders. Mary Ann was last seen alive on Thursday, November 8th, and she was heard singing by lodgers at 1 a.m. on the night. Her body was found around 10:45 a.m. The paper went on to write, the body of the woman was stretched on the bed, fearfully mutilated. Nose and ears had been cut off, and although there had been no dismemberment, the flesh had been stripped off. Leaving the skeleton, there was comparatively little blood, death having been due to the severing of the throat, the mutilations having been subsequently performed. It was evident that a large and keen knife had been used by a hand possessed of some knowledge and practice. That the woman had had no struggle with her betrayer was shown by her position, in the way in which her garments were arranged by the fireplace.
That's rough.
Yeah. So this time we're not talking about dismemberment. We're talking about flaying.
Yeah.
Stripping the flesh off the body down to the skeleton. Okay. That's nightmare-inducing stuff right there. The other thing that I was thinking, if you're someone sitting at home reading these stories, you got to be frightened out of your freaking mind.
Yeah, especially if you're a woman. You're thinking, I don't know if I want to step out on the street after a certain time at night.
Well, now, if you're a wealthy, upscale woman, are you still worried? Because the papers have, taken great care.
Right.
To make sure that they said about all of these women, whether they used the term immoral character or they used the term
unfortunate class.
Oh, yeah, unfortunate class. And I just wonder how deliberate that was. Is that for the benefit of being descriptive? Or is it for the benefit of allaying the fear of the upper class? That, hey, you don't have to worry.
Yeah.
Because this person obviously is going after a certain class of people in our eyes. I don't know that to be a fact, but it wouldn't matter to me. I'd be scared either way.
Absolutely. When I think about this murder here, I think because he had more time, because he was in the apartment, he didn't have to worry about somebody coming by. He had the time to actually do what he did. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't have to worry, I don't think, about obviously being discovered by someone walking by. That wasn't going to happen. According to jacktheripper.org, Dr. Thomas Bond described Mary Ann's injuries in the post-mortem report. The body was lying naked in the middle of the bed, the shoulders flat, but the axis of the body inclined to the left side of the bed. The head was turned on the left cheek. The left arm was close to the body with the forearm flexed at a right angle and lying across the abdomen. The right arm was slightly abducted from the body and rested on the mattress. The elbow bent and the forearm supine with the fingers clenched. The legs were wide apart, the left thigh at right angles to the trunk and the right forming an obtuse angle with the pubes. The whole of the surface of the abdomen and thighs was removed, and the abdominal cavity emptied of its viscera. The breasts were cut off, the arms mutilated by several jagged wounds, and the face hacked beyond recognition of the features. The tissues of the neck were severed all round down to the bone. The viscera were found in various parts. The uterus and kidneys with one breast under the head, the other breast by the right foot, the liver between the feet, the intestines by the right side, and the spleen by the left side of the body. The flaps removed from the abdomen and thighs were on a table. The bed clothing at the right corner was saturated with blood, and on the floor beneath was a pool of blood covering about 2 feet square. The face was gashed in all directions, the nose, cheeks, eyebrows, and ears being partly removed. The lips were blanched and cut by several incisions running obliquely down to the chin. There were also numerous cuts extending irregularly across all the features.
Fuck being sick.
It's stomach churning. It really is. It all jumps out at me, but face hacked beyond recognition.
Yeah.
Okay, that really jumped out at me. And then, taking the internal organs and kind of arranging them under the head, between the feet. Like you said, this guy had a lot of time. He really did, without fear of being caught or exposed. It's almost as if he did all the nasty things he could think of.
Right.
And maybe these were all the nasty things in his head that he always wanted to do.
And now he had the opportunity.
Yeah. It's gut-wrenching.
It's almost like Jack the Ripper performed an autopsy.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're making that comparison. When they talked about the flaps of the abdomen, being pulled back and then ultimately cut off, but that's kind of what they do during an autopsy. In the fall of 1888, the Central News Office, Scotland Yard, and government officials received various letters from someone claiming to be Jack the Ripper. The authorities ultimately received hundreds of letters from someone claiming to be Jack the Ripper. Most of them ended up being hoaxes, but there's a lot of debate on whether or not the first few letters were authentic. According to jacktheripper.org, on September 24th, the last day of the Annie Chapman inquest, an author sent a letter to Sir Charles Warren, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. It read, "Dear Sir, I do not wish to give myself up. I am in misery with nightmare. I am the man who committed all these murders in the last 6 months. I am a horse slaughterer. I have found the woman I wanted, that is Chapman, and I done what I called slaughtered her, but if anyone comes, I will surrender." The letter also contained a drawing of a coffin and a knife. Under the drawing of the knife, the sender wrote, "This is the knife that I done these murders with. It is a small handle with a large long blade, sharp both sides." So police thought this letter was a hoax, but what they didn't know was that it was just the beginning of a series of strange letters they would receive. Now, we do need to talk about the monikers, right? So Jack the Ripper, that's what this killer is infamously known as. But before he was known as Jack the Ripper, the killer was called the Red Fiend, the Whitechapel Murderer, and Leather Apron. Okay, that's got a real chainsaw massacre, leather face thing going on.
Ed
Gein. The name Jack the Ripper appeared for the first time in the infamous Dear Boss letter. According to Casebook, the Central News Agency received the Dear Boss letter on September 27th. The Dear Boss letter was reproduced in newspapers and post bills. The police hoped someone would recognize the handwriting. It read, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work, and I want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha, ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly. Wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp. I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. P.S. Wasn't good enough to post this before. I got all the red ink off my hands. curse it, no luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. I'm not going to lie. I got a little shivery there.
Yeah.
And I had already read this before, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
But reading it out like that, it gave me a real kind of Zodiac vibe. There's been, a number of infamous killers who have written
right.
BTK type vibe.
Sure. This would be more of the original.
Yeah. Yeah, really.
But think about some of the things he said in that letter.
And I hate to keep doing this, comparing this to cases that are much more recent, but I see so many similarities. Obviously, he wants to mess with the police. He says, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep doing this. I think the part that really got me was talking about saving the woman's blood.
And it was too thick to write with?
And then he wanted to use it, but he couldn't because it became too thick. I don't know. So either this was Jack the Ripper, really Jack the Ripper, or this was someone messing with police, calling themselves Jack the Ripper. And I think police will start one way and then kind of lean another. The Central News Agency sent the letter to the Metropolitan Police on September 29th. They thought it was just a prank. The police also thought it was a hoax. That was until September 30th, when Catherine Eddowes and Elizabeth Stride were murdered, and one of Catherine's earlobes was cut off. Okay, do you put a little bit more weight behind it at that point?
I think you have to.
The police were desperate for answers due to intense public pressure to catch the killer. They decided to publish the letter on October 1st. And that's important, right? Knowing that the letter wasn't published until after Catherine and Elizabeth were murdered. If not, then you could make the argument that a person read the letter in the newspaper and decided to
act on it,
copycat, do something like that. But that wasn't possible because the letter wasn't known about to the public, at least,
right,
until after the murders occurred. On October 1st, the Central News Agency received a postcard referencing both murders, which is believed to be written by the same person who wrote the letter. According to Casebook, the handwriting was similar to the Dear Boss letter and referenced the letter and the murders on September 30th before the press ever wrote about it. It read, I was not codding, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number one squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off. Ha, not the time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again, Jack the Ripper. Yeah, so to me, pretty easy to see that the same person who wrote the letter then wrote this.
Yeah, the postcard.
The postcard, because number one, they're referencing the ears, something that wasn't public knowledge at the time.
Right.
They also signed it Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
So, and then you have somebody saying that the handwriting was similar. Whoever wrote the postcard was inferring that it was written just after the murders. The postcard also referenced the fact that the killer had tried to act on the threat to cut off a woman's ears. The publicity ended up leading to a surge of hundreds of letters, many of them hoaxes, which did not help the police investigation. After the Dear Boss letter, there were more letters from the killer threatening to send a body part to the police. Instead, a human organ was sent to a man named George Lusk. George Lusk was a figure in the papers because he was president of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. He had also been urging the Home Office to reconsider their decision not to offer a reward for information.
So you got to wonder, why did they not want to offer a reward? Was it because the victims were not of the right class?
And therefore not deemed worthy of a reward?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But at the same time, we're talking about how much pressure the police are under. So you would think that they would want to solve this just because of the publicity and the pressure. I don't know. You and I talk about rewards a lot. And obviously, many differences in different countries. We know Australia doesn't mess around. They offer a lot of money.
Yeah.
I don't know what was going on in the late 1800s and especially in England, but it seems like a bad decision. I'll say that. According to jacktheripper.org, on October 4th, 1888, a suspicious man came to Lusk's home asking for him. He was told that Lusk was at a nearby tavern. News of the World reported that he found Lusk at the tavern and subjected him to a barrage of questions about the beats taken by the members of the Mile End Vigilance Committee. He tried to get Lusk to go into a private room, but it was reported that the stranger's appearance was so repulsive and forbidding that Mr. Lusk declined, but consented to hold a quiet conversation with him in the bar parlor. During the conversation, the stranger took a pencil out of his pocket and dropped it off to the side. He asked Lusk to pick it up. As Lusk did so, the stranger reached into his pocket, but when Lusk saw him doing this, he assumed a nonchalant air. So let me get this straight. Lusk is with this guy who he says was so repulsive and forbidding that he didn't want to be alone with him. Then the guy drops a pencil and asks him to pick it up. He does so.
For what reason?
For reasons unknown.
Right.
I don't know why you would do that. And then he catches him reaching into his pocket, and all of a sudden the guy acts like, oh, I wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he asked to be directed to the nearest coffee and dining rooms. And then Lusk followed the guy, but he wasn't there.
Almost makes you wonder if this guy was the Ripper, or was this a different guy? And regardless of who the guy was, what did he have in his other pocket? A knife? Would he wanted to see how close he could get to this guy and maybe take him out if he wanted to?
I don't know who he was, but it doesn't seem to me as though his intentions were honorable.
Yeah.
Like he wanted to do something, but he got caught in the act of pulling out of his pocket whatever he was going to use, and then he kind of played it off. That's the way it sounds to me.
Right. Because I don't think it was like a reporter. I don't think a reporter would come into a place like that and have an appearance that was so repulsive and forbidding, that the gentleman didn't want to speak to him in a private room.
On October 10th, another man was seen outside of Lusk's home. According to jacktheripper.org, 2 days later, Lusk received a letter. It read, I write you a letter in black ink, as I have no more of the right stuff. I think you are all asleep in Scotland Yard with your bloodhounds, as I will show you tomorrow night, Saturday. I'm going to do a double event, but not in Whitechapel. Got rather too warm there, had to shift. No more till you hear from me again. Okay, I get that letter. I'm a little worried.
Absolutely.
But then Lusk received a postcard that read, say, boss, you seem rare frightened. Guess I'd like to give you fits, but can't stop time enough to let your box of toys play copper games with me, but hope to see you when I don't hurry much. Bye-bye, boss. All right, ominous, threatening.
Kind of toying with you?
Yes. On October 15th, a woman named Miss Marsh was working in a leather shop. A man came in and seemed interested in the Vigilance Committee's reward poster. So apparently by this point, they had offered up a reward. Miss Marsh told him to ask at a nearby pub, but he said he didn't want to go there. So she got out a newspaper with George Lusk's street name in the report. The man wrote the street name down in the notebook. Miss Marsh described him as slender, about 45 years old, and 6 feet tall, with a sallow complexion and a dark beard and mustache. She said he had an Irish accent. According to jacktheripper.org, on October 16th, George Lusk received a small cardboard box in the mail. Inside the box was half of a kidney, preserved in wine with a letter.
Wow. Yeah.
Kidney with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. So this letter read, from hell, Mr. Lusk, sore. I send you half the kidney I took from one woman and preserved it for you. The other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk. Now, the thing about this is that there's misspellings throughout.
Right.
So I read it as though they weren't misspelled, but like almost half of the words in this are misspelled. It seems to me very different from the other writing.
I agree with you.
But you did get a kidney.
You did.
Interestingly, the package had Lusk's name and his street name on it, but not his house number. His house number had been omitted from the newspaper report that Miss Marsh showed the man. It only listed his street name. So Lusk thought the package was just a disturbing prank, and he assumed the kidney came from an animal. But his fellow Vigilance Committee members thought he should get a medical opinion.
Yeah, but because why would you think someone would actually send you a real kidney?
Someone who's writing threatening, ominous letters to you?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I think I'm taking everything seriously at this point until somebody tells me, no, this is not a human organ. Lusk took the kidney to a local surgeon. The doctor's assistant examined the kidney and thought it was human, but he advised Lusk to get a second opinion. So Lusk took it to the London hospital, where it was examined by Dr. Thomas Openshaw, pathological curator. On October 19th, the Star reported, there seems to be no room for doubt that what has been sent to Mr. Lusk is part of a human kidney. Dr. Openshaw told a Star reporter today that after having examined the piece of kidney under the microscope, he was of opinion that it was half of a left human kidney. He couldn't say, however, whether it was that of a woman, nor how long ago it had been removed from the body, as it had been preserved in spirit. All right, Mr. Lusk, how you feeling now?
Yeah, now I'd be a little bit nervous.
So I said earlier, I was getting Zodiac vibes, BTK vibes, Leatherface vibes. Now I'm getting a real Silence of the Lambs vibe here, and it's disconcerting, to say the least. But then on October 20th, the East London Advertiser quoted Openshaw as saying that the kidney belonged to a woman around age 45, and that it was removed from the body within the past 3 weeks. The paper also noted that Eddowes was missing her left kidney.
Trying to tie it all together.
They are. The kidney was given to the Metropolitan Police. Most people, including doctors and police who investigated the case, agree the letter was a prank. According to Casebook, on October 29th, Dr. Openshaw received the letter from someone claiming to be Jack the Ripper, but it's believed to be a hoax. It read, "Old boss, you was right. It was the left kidney. I was going to operate again, close to your hospital, just as I was going to draw my knife along her throat. Them cusses of coppers spoilt the game, but I guess I will be on the job soon and will send you another bit of innards." And this one was signed Jack the Ripper. But again, like the last letter, there are so many words misspelled that it was actually very, very hard to read.
It really was.
And I have not heard anyone use the term innards since Mountain Dew had that on their as their slogan. I think it was like, "It'll tickle your innards" or something like that. Remember there was like an old mountain man?
No.
You don't remember that?
No.
I'll have to look that up on the internet. Somebody will remember that.
Tickle my innards.
I swear, it used to say something like that back in the day.
Don't be tickling my innards.
Look it up on the internet. The letter went on to say, "Oh, have you seen the devil with his microscope and scalpel looking at a kidney with a slide cocked up?" So I mentioned it, right? Most people thought that these letters were prank letters. The police determined that most of the letters they received were pranks. In October 1988, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren wrote that he thought the Dear Boss letter was a hoax. In 1910, Former assistant commissioner and head of the criminal investigation department at Scotland Yard, Sir Robert Anderson, wrote in his memoirs that he believed the letter was created by a journalist. In 1913, journalist George Sims wrote to Detective Chief Inspector John George Littlechild, head of the special branch during the murders. Littlechild replied that Scotland Yard believed that Tom Bullen of Central News was the one who created the term Jack the Ripper, or that his chief, Charles Moore, invented the name.
Probably made for good news, if that's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I see where this person's going. If you are a newspaper person and you can create the name and you're the first to report on the name, I could see where, the paper and you yourself would benefit from that. But I'm not sure that that's how it happened. It seemed like everybody got a copy of the letter when it was released. JackTheRipper.org reports that Littlechild was wrong about the name Bullen. It was Thomas J. Bulling who worked at Central News Agency. Bullen was a man who sent a handwritten copy of another letter to the police. Also, the original From Hell letter has disappeared, as well as any items associated with the kidney. Now, is that surprising?
No.
I mean, 100+ years. We have cases from like 10 years ago where evidence has been lost, misplaced, you name it.
Stolen. Destroyed.
In 2018, University of Manchester researcher Andrea Ninny analyzed 209 letters, including the Dear Boss letter. The Dear Boss letter is considered authentic because the writer promises to cut off the ears of the next victim, and the next victim, Catherine Eddowes, had one of her earlobes severed. Another letter that is considered authentic is the Saucy Jackie postcard, which predicts a double murder and refers to the killer in third person, calling him Saucy Jackie. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, Ninny found that Dear Boss and Saucy Jackie share distinctive linguistic constructs, such as the use of the phrase to keep back instead of the word withhold. So this makes a lot of sense to me, Gibbs. I mean, we talked about, these two writings were said to have been very similar in regards to the handwriting. There also was not a lot of misspellings as there were in some of the other letters that were received. The tone just sounded similar, I thought, in reading them.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if that means that they came from the real Jack the Ripper, but I think a lot of people point to the fact that the next victim did have an earlobe removed.
So it makes you wonder.
Well, it does, because according to everything in the research, this letter was not public knowledge at the time of that murder. Ninny told George Dvorsky from Gizmodo, even though the Dear Boss letter was not in the public domain when the Saucy Jackie postcard was received, they present a level of linguistic similarity in terms of combination of words in common that is much higher than one would expect if they were completely unrelated. The combination of words in common between the two letters are distinctive, so that one would not expect them to be shared by chance alone. The press release from the university stated that previous handwriting analysis had also connected the two letters, but Ninny found that linguistic analysis possibly linked the letters to a third letter, known as the Moab and Midian letter. According to Casebook, the Moab and Midian letter reads as follows. Dear Mr. Williamson, at 5 minutes to 9 o'clock tonight, we received the following letter, the envelope of which I enclose. It is in the same handwriting as the previous communications, 5 October 1888. Dear friend, in the name of God, hear me, I swear. I did not kill the female whose body was found at Whitehall. If she was an honest woman, I will hunt down and destroy her murderer. If she was a whore, God will bless the hand that slew her. For the women of Moab and Midian shall die, and their blood shall mingle with the dust. I never harm any others, or the divine power that protects and helps me in my grand work would quit forever. Do as I do, and the light of glory shall shine upon you. I must get to work tomorrow. Terrible event this time. Yes, 3 must be ripped. We'll send you a bit of face by post, I promise, this dear old boss. The police now reckon my work a practical joke. Well, Jackie's a very practical joker. Ha ha ha. Keep this back till 3 are wiped out, and you can show the cold meat. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Yours truly, TJ Bulling. So this one is a little tougher for me. I see some similarities. There's a little bit more misspelling of words in this one as the first 2 that are considered authentic. And they're obviously the tone is much different. I mean, it talks about divine power and glory shall shine upon you.
Right. More religious.
Yeah. A little bit more with a religious bent or something like that. This letter was long regarded as a hoax, but Smithsonian Magazine wrote that if all 3 letters are actually linked, this adds credibility to the journalist theory. And basically that's the theory that states that the early letters were written by London journalists to keep the story going. And one of those theories is that a central news agency reporter named Thomas Bulling was behind the letters, or a journalist named Fred Best. Andrea Ninny told Gizmodo, there's historical evidence that points to the journalist theory for the earliest ones, Dear Boss and Saucy Jackie. And since this Moab and Midian letter might have been entirely fabricated at the central news agency, the original document was never found or sent to the police. If the linguistic evidence supports that this was the same author as the Dear Boss and Saucy Jackie, then we could argue that the linguistic evidence does support to the journalist theory. However, this is a conclusion that should be reached by the historians, not the linguists.
I'm just wondering if you had seen both of the early letter, right, the boss letter, and then saw the Saucy Jackie postcard, could you not write something similar if you were good at that? Could you not pick up on the way that individual writes and try to write something just like him to maybe fool?
Yeah. I mean, there are people that are pretty good at copying other people's handwriting. Yeah, I don't know. But, you know, to me, this third one that we've taught, the Moab and Midian, other than the fact that it references Jackie, it says Dear Old Boss, it's signed Jack the Ripper. Other than that, it doesn't seem to fall in line with the other 2 to me. Now, again, if the handwriting matches, all of that, that's one thing. I mean, it's still a nasty one. The letter talks about sending a piece of a person's face through post.
I feel that the first letter in the postcard came from Jack the Ripper.
And not journalists trying to keep the story alive.
That's where I'm at right now.
That's the thing about the Jack the Ripper case. I mean, there are so many different theories. Everybody's got an opinion. It's why it's still talked about today as much as it is. So, you know, we've covered the 5 murders that are often referred to as the canonical murders. We've talked about the Jack the Ripper letters. We obviously need to discuss the potential suspects. So in part 2 of the Jack the Ripper episodes, we'll discuss some of the most well-known suspects, more information about the victims of Jack the Ripper, and some modern updates in the investigation. So a lot of interesting stuff coming in episode 2. But that's it for our first episode on Jack the Ripper. I will say this before we get to voicemails, you know, whoever this was, if it was the same individual, you're talking about one sick SOB.
Oh, absolutely.
When you go through the descriptions of just exactly what was done to these women, I mean, you said it it's stomach churning. It's enough to make you sick. Unfortunately, it paints a very vivid picture that is kind of hard to get out of your mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a sick individual.
For sure.
So in part 2, we'll talk about who people think that could be.
Yeah.
We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
What's up, guys? My name is Jacob. I'm from Lake Charles, Louisiana. Love the podcast. Found y'all looking for podcasts that cover the Jennings 8 that happened early 2000s, I believe it was. I've been listening ever since. I just subscribed to Patreon and thought I'd give y'all a voicemail. Team Gibby, all the way. Keep up the good work, y'all, and stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
All right. Love it. Glad you found the podcast. Thank you for joining our Patreon. That means a lot.
Absolutely. And I knew I liked them.
Yeah. I knew you,
I didn't know why.
Before you even heard
That's
it.
right.
And now you know why.
Now I know why.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. My name is Rory, and I'm from the D.C. area. I just wanted to say that I love both of your podcasts, so much so that I recommend it to all of my friends that listen to podcasts or have an interest in true crime. I haven't gotten around to criminology yet, but I plan on doing so when I get caught up on TCAT and TCAT Unsolved. I'm actually quite far behind, as I only started listening to your podcast about a year ago, but I'm working on getting caught up. I actually wanted to call because as I was listening to the Cindy James case on Unsolved, that creepy, raspy voicemail literally gave me the chills. And I just had to keep looking over my shoulder, make sure that no one was going to come and get me. I do have 2 suggestions for future episodes. I'm not sure if they have been done already, but for TCAT, I wanted to request the DC sniper case, and for Unsolved, I wanted to request the disappearance of Alicia Rudd. Anyways, thank you for taking my voicemail. Keep up the great work and keep your own time ticking.
All right. All right. We haven't done either one of those yet, have we? We didn't cover DC yet. DC sniper?
Thought we did. Maybe we didn't.
Maybe we did. I don't know. 600 and some episodes, man. I'm telling you, it really gets tough to remember right off the top of your head.
You think we'd open up our fancy show notes spreadsheet of everything that we've done, but why do that?
I know. I actually
takes the fun out of it. You know?
I actually do have a spreadsheet. That's how bad it's gotten that I have to keep a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
To make sure that we don't double up.
Yeah. Remember when I used to be so bad on spreadsheets, I'd look at every single, instead of just doing a control F and typing it in, I would just be like, forever.
Until I told you how Excel worked.
You taught me a lot about Excel.
I did.
At our previous job together.
I did.
You were like, why are you taking so long to give me the number I need? I'm like,
at one time, I was considered a pretty good at Excel.
I remember being on that call counting, like, you can probably hear me count 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're like, it tells you the number down below if you highlight the column.
You just highlight
like,
it.
oh, yeah. It's nice. Good old days.
Hi, guys. This is Susan in Illinois. I just wanted to tell you something funny. I'm listening to the Keisha Jacobs episode. It's just the beginning, and you guys are talking about your kids not really checking in with you as much. So, as you were saying, it gets harder as you're an adult, you know. Well, I'm 52, and so I checked in with my dad. He kind of made me think, all right, I should, you know. And I said, hey, just checking in with you to say hi. And my dad texted back and said, hey. So I don't know if he really cares if I check in or not. This is hilarious. Anyway, I'll do it more often just because of you guys. Thanks. Stay safe. Keep your own time ticking.
Always good to check in.
Yeah, I love that story. So did he text back, hey, because he didn't care or because he's not much of a texter? And I would lean towards the second.
I'm thinking the same thing.
Yeah, he obviously cares. Because I'm all excited when I get a text from or a call from my girls. Not many calls because they don't use the phone.
You're just happy to get that text message.
Yeah, it's nice. I like it. All right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time. Next week, part 2 of Jack the Ripper. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
All month long on Pluto TV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows. Available on live and on demand. Download the free Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.